Hello and welcome to the Health Freedom Hub. I'm your host, Jeff Cantor, and today's guest is a longtime health freedom advocate, Dr. Mary Ruwart. So Mary, welcome.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
I was going to give a little bit of a background there on for you because not everybody knows who you are. So I was going to say that after medical school, you were at the Department of Surgery at the St. Louis University School of Medicine, and then you spent 19 long years at Upjohn Pharmaceuticals. And then after that, a completely different gear, you were a candidate for president with the Libertarian Party. And also you have a fantastic book, which I love and give out as a gift all the time, Healing Our World, which is an awful lot, so that's pretty awesome. And starting right off, how many languages is that book of yours published in now?
I think it's 8.
Fantastic. And I was going to ask you, I love that book a lot, so I really wanted to kind of talk about that for a quick minute. So
Sure.
why don't you explain why you wrote that book and what is that book? Because almost no one probably knows who that is potentially that's listening to this, and they do need to know.
Yes, well, I wrote Healing Our World because I had I guess you could say, an epiphany at some point between the libertarian ideal of the non-aggression principle, which actually we all learned as children and still practice on a one-to-one basis, but have kind of forgotten about it when it comes to interacting group to group through government. So I already had that ethic in mind, and then I realized that the ends and means are intimately related, and that the Christian idea of loving your neighbor as yourself, and some of the principles of the New Age movement, at least that's what we call it at the time. I guess now the consciousness movement might be what we would say today. Those ideas all came together, and what I realized is that it was so practical. If we wanted, as we most all do, a prosperous and peaceful world, it was most practical to practice the non-aggression principle. And as I looked over the literature, I realized there were many, many examples of how, liberty works in the real world. And, if it doesn't work there, then who wants it, right?
Right, exactly.
So,
yeah.
So that's what became Healing Our World.
And kind of what's the objective of that book? What does it kind of explain or do for people when they read it?
Well, first of all, it's a very hopeful book. When you think of politics, you think of how dirty it is, and it feels unclean, and that's because it is. There's this disconnect between how we relate on a one-to-one basis and how we relate group to group. So what Healing Our World does is it shows us how we can really use the same non-aggression principle that we use in our individual interactions to really change our world and bring universal peace and plenty, which is what we all want.
What kind of reception have you seen in these other countries that it's been translated into?
Oh, it's been very exciting because it has been just embraced totally. In fact, I get many requests to have a digital copy because, of course, shipping is so
Costly,
so difficult.
Sure, these days, sure. And in fact, as a part of your active activities, you're also involved with Liberty International.
That's right.
So
yes, I'm currently chair of Liberty International, which is basically, I guess you could say, it's a compilation of actually 2 other organizations: Students for Individual Liberty, which was founded, back in the late 70s and was active in the 80s, and Liberty International, which was a movement to connect all of the liberty-loving people in the world. So we have a conference every year. And our website, you can go to it. It's liberty-int.org. So it's .org, and it's very, very exciting.
Fantastic. And, that does seem like a natural outreach from the book that you wrote for sure. And, how many countries is Liberty International operating in right now?
We're in almost every country at some level.
That's pretty fantastic. And these conventions are typically around the world. The last one was in Puerto Rico, correct?
That's right. And the next one's going to be in Poland in August.
And where was the one prior to Puerto Rico?
We've had one in Bali. We've had, I think there's 38 of them now, and they're all listed on our website.
Fantastic. Isn't that great to see? That's super. Well, completely shifting gears because we're staying on the topic of being an author, but in fact, I think I've heard up the grapevine you have a book coming out this spring, potentially.
That's right. It's called Death by Regulation.
Oh, that sounds exciting.
It
sounds like a thriller.
Well, I'll tell you, the full title is Death by Regulation, How We Were Robbed of the Golden Age of Health and How We Can Reclaim It. So it does have an optimistic outlook. It just basically shows that because of the FDA regulations that were passed in 1962, about half of the people who have died since then have lost 10 years of their lives.
Wow.
And that's a conservative estimate, Jeff. Actually, each of us has probably been adversely affected. And the way we've been adversely affected is we shifted from a paradigm of prevention to treatment only. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the things we'll talk about today because I really believe in prevention.
Absolutely, and that's the whole key of what we're all about in this idea of the Health Freedom Hub is how we all collectively going to escape and save each other from all this horror and misery. And unless we get information out, we'll never even know to do it. So this is spectacular. This is really very good. So from what you were, and kind of starting into what you want to talk about, from all those years you were a researcher, what kind of was your takeaway? You kind of went in with one kind of ideal, and what did you kind of come out with after you spent all those years in that pharmaceutical research?
Well, my first reaction when I joined the Upjohn Company was I couldn't figure out how any drug actually made it to the marketplace because the regulatory requirements were not only so demanding, they changed all the time. And it was hard to keep up with. The other thing, though, and something we'll talk about today, again, this prevention theme, is, back then we couldn't genetically manipulate our animals. We had to find a way to create a disease model a different way. And it was very tough because our animals had been fed so carefully. Each vitamin had been titrated, so our animals were very healthy. They just didn't get sick very much. So the way we made them sick was to take away their vitamins.
Huh.
Which, of course, is a big wake-up call.
Exactly.
For the researchers, and it's like, okay, if you don't have optimal nutrition, you're not going to have optimal health.
Hello.
So, yeah, and this is the paradigm I think we've lost.
Right.
Of course, I was discovering all this for myself, in the 70s, and I had to watch as the FDA regulations really made it difficult for the average person to find out about what optimal nutrition actually was. Mm-hmm. And this is very difficult. So I have some suggestions, for your listeners about these things.
Absolutely.
And that was kind of my big aha moment.
I would bet. And then something made you realize, like you were describing, look, hey, we've taken people that are already healthy or animals or whatever, and we're making them sick to figure out how to create a drug to make them healthy again. Why don't we just let them stay healthy, kind of a thing?
Well, yeah. And one time I had a gentleman that I was on the airplane with, and he said, hey, I understand Upjohn is starting to develop these compounds called lazaroids, which it was named after Lazarus because these compounds seem to do everything, right? So just about raising people from the dead. At least that was, or raising our rats from the dead, obviously. People, we weren't marketing them yet. Sure. But this gentleman wanted one, and I went to the person who was in charge of the project, and he said, well, we can't really give him the lazaroids, but just tell him to take a lot of vitamin E. It'll do the same thing. So
it's like,
and you might ask, well, why are we?
That was like a Freudian slip for sure.
Actually, no. It's actually, we all knew that. Even I knew that at some level, even though it wasn't my project. But that vitamin E did the same kinds of things.
Amazing.
But we can't jump through all the regulatory hoops without incurring a huge price tag. And of course, vitamin E is not patented any longer, if it ever was. And so
no money in that.
We couldn't recover our investment.
Sure.
So we have to do a drug instead. It's crazy.
Well, you can always see, the problem is that it's not a medical world for you or me, it's a medical world for business. And that's the idea of where we're going to keep trying to preach again on our end of the thing is it has to be bottom up again. That's the key.
Yes, and it can be, because the internet's really changed the game.
Yeah, and that's why we're bringing a lot of people together to get to talk about this so everyone can find out about each other and all these options that are out there. Because I've been telling in a lot of these interviews and videos is that you're like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. You can escape. All of the things are there right now for you to walk away if you choose to do so.
Yes, sometimes it's a little more difficult if you don't have a scientific background, but that's one reason I'm here today. I want to share with your listeners some of the things that I've discovered that are helpful in my life,
So,
and hopefully will be helpful in theirs.
yeah, I would say let's hear about that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I have to deal with is cancer because my family is very susceptible to cancer. I've already lost two younger siblings to it.
Mm.
And so, obviously, unlike cardiovascular disease and stroke, where great strides have been made in the last few decades, cancer treatment still is kind of iffy. Most of the cancer recoveries that we have are because we've learned to catch the cancer earlier. And what I want to talk about is how to catch the cancer even before all of the imaging techniques like mammograms can pick it up.
Fantastic.
Because if you know that you have cancer floating around in your system, then you can, obviously you want to look for it, and this will tell you how to look for it and catch it early so that you have the possibility of getting it before it metastasizes, because once it metastasizes, it's much, much harder
To
get rid
deal
of.
with.
So I want to talk about two very easy blood tests. And I personally have used these and found out about my breast cancer a few years back. So
Fantastic.
one of the tests is called an AMAS test. And basically what this is, it's an antibody that your body makes to cancer. And the website for it is oncolabinc.com, oncolabinc.com. And again, I'm going to say the name of the test, AMAS. And so when I took this test, I found out that my levels were elevated. And basically, although the manufacturer doesn't make the claim that this is a quantitative test, in the early stages it is. So given the number that you get, you can kind of get an idea of, what level how much tumor burden, I guess you can say, that you have. And remember, as I'm talking, Jeff, and I want all your listeners to realize this, I am not an MD, I'm a PhD, and so I'm not a doctor, I'm not giving medical advice here. What I am doing is I am telling you from the perspective of a researcher things that I have found that might be useful, and your listeners should talk to their medical teams about this, before they go ahead. The nice thing about the AMAS test is it isn't expensive. Most insurance companies pay for it, but you do have to buy the dry ice and the shipping, which is about $125. So, but to find out that you have cancer early on is important.
Small price to pay.
Exactly. Now the next thing, of course, you have it. So where is it? Well, there's another test called the ENOX-2 test. ENOX-2, the number 2. And the website for it is oncoblotlabs.com. ONCOBLOTINC.com. Now, what this test does is it tells you where what we call the primary site of the tumor is, where it has originated. Now, so for example, I took the test and I had breast, so that's where we looked for it. And it took us a couple years to find it because these tests are sensitive.
Boy, that's a pretty good precursor. Yes.
So the nice thing is, because I found it early, I could get a lumpectomy and radiation rather than having to, basically have a mastectomy.
Right.
So this is obvious.
Huge.
And of course, we presumably caught it before it went anywhere.
Exactly. Huge advances for sure. That's fantastic.
Yes, and now this test is a little pricey. Most insurance companies don't pay for it. It's $800. But again, it's well worth it if you find out before it is metastasized, because you will certainly pay much more than that, no matter how good your insurance is.
Forget even about money. What it's going to do to you physically would be horrible.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So I really basically, did not have a big severe problem, because I was able to catch this when I was still healthy and before it metastasized. And so if any of your listeners here are prone to cancer, or they have it in their family, or they just want to make sure,
Sure.
that they're clean, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, these are tests that
Hmm.
are helpful. Now, I have to tell you, most GPs don't know about these tests. In fact, I have found that some oncologists don't know about them.
Hmm.
So, you might have to go to the website, and they do have both of these tests have people on board who can counsel with your doctor and kind of
Fantastic.
explain what the results mean. So it's a wonderful thing.
Another reason having you on here is breaking information that everyone needs to know that's just hidden in the sidelines that we all have readily available if we just knew about it. So thank you
That's
very much on that one. What other exciting news have you got?
Well, one of the things I wanted to talk about in relation to cancer and some other diseases too
Hmm.
was diet. One of the things that a lot of people have to deal with when they have cancer is the fact that cancer requires a lot of glucose or sugar to grow. So obviously, you don't want to be eating things that raise your blood glucose very much. And this is also a problem for people who have diabetes or prediabetes. They
Hmm.
want to know, what meals they can eat and what
Sure.
they can't.
Sure.
Now, if you read the material that the American Diabetic Association puts out, it's pretty much a one-size-fits-all type of
Sure.
diet they propose.
Right.
But I have found I'm very different than, some other people are.
Sure.
And the way I found out, and this is something that's just brand new on the market in the U.S. right now. The way I
Fantastic.
found out was using what's called a continuous glucose monitor.
Hmm.
I got mine from Germany because they weren't available in the U.S. until basically last month.
Wow, that is pretty new.
Yes, and let me explain a little bit about it. And the
Yeah, how
nice
does
thing
it
is
work and
it's actually
stuff?
cheaper than it was in Germany.
Wow. Well, yeah, that almost would make a little sense, but go ahead. This is exciting.
Yes. So basically, what this is, if you've ever uh, used these little uh, lancets that you stick your finger
Finger
with,
with you up. Take a
and
little
then
blood
measure
reading.
your blood glucose. That's
Hmm.
kind of painful, and you don't want to have to do it, several times after every meal to find
No, that would
out.
be pretty obnoxious, I would imagine.
Yes, yes. So this thing takes care of all that. So what this is, it's a little round button. It's probably about this big, and it's got a tiny needle in it, very thin, thinner than those lancets that you use for your fingers.
Hmm.
And what you do is you put it on your arm. There's a little spring-loaded apparatus, very similar to the lancet
Hmm.
apparatus that you use for poking your finger.
Hmm.
And you stick it on your arm, and it's good for 2 weeks. Now, when I say it's good, it's continuously measuring your blood glucose.
Do you
And
even,
then
can you tell? Can you sense that it's doing it?
you can't sense that it's doing it, but what you do
Huh.
is you have a reader. Now, it's about this size. This is not the actual reader, but it's about this size.
Wow.
And you just swipe it over
Oh.
yeah,
Oh, like a little
and
Bluetooth kind of a thing there. Just picks up the signal and gives it the reading.
that's right. And you get a graph, 8-hour graph.
Wow.
And the beauty of it, it's all downloadable into your computer.
Oh, super.
So what you can do is you can eat a meal, and then you can watch and see what it does to your blood glucose.
Yes, in real time. That's fantastic.
And I've gotten a bunch of surprises. Some things that, like a lot of people can eat beans and it doesn't seem to shoot their blood glucose up. I eat beans and,
And it does-
it's through the roof.
So that's kind of how you've experimented. Let me eat a bunch of oranges and see what happens. Now I'll try cherries and kind of work your way through the food calendar.
That's right.
Hey,
And
that's a
remember,
great. Which is
remember that what you eat your food with makes a difference. In other words, protein will attenuate or lower your blood glucose normally. So, for example, there are diets like the Zone diet that recommend that you always have a little bit of protein in every meal. And one of the things to do is to try different diets and see how they affect your blood glucose. So since I mentioned the Zone diet, let me just say that it's one I'm very familiar with because when I was at Upjohn, one of our main research topics were prostaglandins, which are naturally occurring hormones that are made in every cell of your body. And they're also called eicosanoids today. And when you take fish oil, basically what you do is you make the anti-inflammatory prostaglandins. And you know, there's kind of a balance going on. So you want, you want the anti-inflammatory prostaglandins, obviously, to be,
Sure.
uh, to be higher or about the same at the very least as your inflammatory prostaglandins. You need both of them, but you need the balance.
You need
right?
that balance, of course.
The problem is, and this is one reason I recommend highly this continuous glucose monitor, the problem is in our society today, if you look at our American diet, we are very heavily carbohydrate oriented.
Yes.
Which means that most of us are at risk for having really high glucose levels. Now, the nice thing about this glucose monitor, it doesn't cost too much. So Walgreens, for example, has it. You can get it without a prescription. You need the reader, which of course is the little gizmo that you swipe over your arm. And that you can use, over and over again. And it's about $75.
For the little arm patch part, is that, after 2 weeks you have to replace it with a different one, or do you just replace a battery in it?
You do have to replace it. It's
The whole thing?
$50. So, your initial package is $128, I think, something like that. And then you're going to pay $50 for every time you want the 2-week sensor.
So about $100 a month.
Yes, if you did it all the time.
And do you leave it on all the time, like in the shower and everything, or you only wear it during the day?
Yes,
Really?
you can wear it in the shower.
Wow.
Yes.
Well,
And I've actually worn it swimming.
and sleeping too? You leave it on overnight?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Wow. Oh, well, that's pretty
You can't
convenient.
take it off, or you can't put it back on.
Oh, okay. That's what I was just curious if it's like an on and off type thing. So you put it on, it's on for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay.
basically.
Okay. I just want to understand how it functions. That's good.
Yeah.
Set it and
So-
forget it.
Huh?
Kind of set it and forget it a little bit.
Yes.
Which is good.
And so now let's say you were trying the zone diet. So the zone diet is basically 30% fat, 30% protein, and 40% carbs. And those carbs should come mostly from fruits and vegetables.
Oh, okay.
You want to have heavy on the fruits and vegetables. I think everybody probably listening to this knows that.
Kind of
already.
knows that already, right?
So, and if you go to zonediet.com, what you'll see is that Barry Sears, the person who designed the zone diet, has also some foods you can buy, like pasta where the carbohydrate is absorbed very slowly. It's especially absorbed slowly if you make it up and put it in the refrigerator overnight. And that's what I do with it. And I get a very small blip when I eat that.
Excellent.
And of course that allows me to have something that is similar to a food that I would prefer to eat.
Want or
and don't
crave.
because,
Yeah.
it'll shoot my blood glucose up.
And
too
that
much.
is right, the key challenge. How do I give up pizza and start eating like collard greens? It's a tough stretch for most people to jump from one extreme to the other. That's a nice little transitional piece there.
Yeah, and of course what people can do, and I do too, is I throw a lot of vegetables in with the pasta and my vegetables and my protein and a slow absorbing carb. And with a little olive oil, salt and pepper, or I like to put in bread dipping spices into the pasta. I don't do the bread, I do the dipping spices though, because I love that so much.
Sounds fantastic. Who brought the wine? So that's really good. So what else do you want to tell us about that? Is there anything else you've got up your sleeve?
Yeah, just one more thing. One of the big advantages of I think I said this, but I need to emphasize it. One of the big advantages of the zone diet is that it's anti-inflammatory.
Very important.
Inflammation is bad. It's bad for heart disease. It's bad for cancer, diabetes. I mean, there's hardly anything, and the problem, because we have such high carbs in our diet, most of us are in very high inflammation. And you can actually check your inflammation when you take the test that they have there at zonediet.com.
Really? Oh, that's good. Because realistically, not everybody really realizes, but it seems like from what I've been discovering and it's emerging is it seems like the bulk of America is running around in inflammation.
That's right. That's right. Now, one of the things Barry says is that about 2/3 of the people are sensitive to glucose. I'm one of them, and sensitive to carbs. And he says about 1/3 of the population, though, doesn't have that problem. And if you don't have that problem, then you might be happier in a diet like the Whole Foods diet. John Mackey, the person who started the Whole Foods chain of
Grocery stores, sure.
just out a book, Whole Foods Diet. And in that, he's basically advocating a vegetable-based diet. And again, he has things like beans and things that I have trouble eating. But if you're one of the 1/3 of the population who doesn't have such a problem with having your blood sugar shoot up when you eat some grains or some beans, then that might be the better diet for you. It's again something you need to talk about with your doctor,
Sure.
nutritionist, whatever. Because I'm not licensed. I'm not giving medical advice. I'm simply sharing with you what I know as a researcher.
And what you're describing gives you a good starting point, because that is the problem in many respects in America, is that most people are not in charge or responsible for their own health. It seems like they're deferring to everybody else's advice, or here, just eat this or do this or whatever. And that test allows you to see your individuality, because every doctor I get to talk to says if I give the same prescription to 10 people, I'm going to get a different result. And,
Yes,
and that
yes,
test and what you discover with that monitoring device, that really exemplifies and amplifies that reality.
That's right. And I had some real surprises when I used it. And I'm sure most people who use it will find those surprises, and you know what to avoid. And also, of course, we talked earlier about how my rats at Upjohn had such good nutrition they didn't get sick, right? So obviously another part of this whole thing is what is good nutrition. So for that, I recommend the Life Extension Foundation, lifeextension.com, and they talk about the benefits of nutrients, and they talk about the benefits of certain drugs. I mean, they're very focused on living a long and healthy life. So when people ask me, where should I go for information about vitamins and minerals and drugs and things of that nature, I say lifeextension.com is probably the best single source.
Fantastic.
I mean, there are many sources, obviously.
Sure. But the idea is to highlight and bring to the fore all the ones that sometimes don't get known about. And we've been talking about them on the Hub in the past, too, so I'm glad you're mentioning them again. So we were talking a little bit about how individuals, can start to take control for themselves and learn about their own health and try to seek out some different kinds of doctors. What should they start to do politically that are going to help improve the situation in the country?
Well, of course, I'm a libertarian and have been for many decades, and I recommend checking out the Libertarian Party because it's for health freedom all of the time. And they often have initiatives that you can check out. Now, Life Extension also has initiatives, and they will, if you sign up for their email list, they will inform you when something important is going on. There's also a number of organizations. One I've been involved with recently is the Goldwater Institute and their Right to Try initiative, which is now actually being considered by Congress.
As it should.
Yes, and this is something your listeners might want to know about too, because it's not actually been well publicized. It's passed in 38 states, and what it allows terminally ill patients to do is negotiate directly with a drug company and try to get their drugs before they actually have FDA approval. Now, the drug companies won't always say yes, but when they do, obviously, and that's something that you might want to do or your listeners might want to do if the situation is really bad, you actually have that option. It takes an average of 10 to 14 years to get a drug from the lab bench to the marketplace.
A lot of people die in that window of time.
Exactly. So this is not a trivial thing.
No.
And so that's another thing that I wanted to alert your listeners to, because what I'm finding is even in states where it's passed, most people don't know about it, and most doctors don't know about it. The beauty of it is it's easier to negotiate with a drug company than to go first to the FDA, have your doctor spend hours and hours filling out forms for the FDA, and then maybe not getting an approval, at least not in a timely fashion.
Right, that's for sure. With that being the case, is it the kind of situation where it's a double-edged sword to that pharmaceutical company, because either it's going to start to show the validity of that medication, or it may expose the fact that it's got problems?
Well, actually, the big downside, from my perspective as someone who used to be in the industry, is that the FDA sometimes punishes companies for doing things they don't like. And the FDA doesn't want people going around them to the pharmaceutical companies.
Even if it's the right thing to do. That's terrible.
That's right. So that's a big part of the issue. Now, I should mention that the Heartland Institute is backing and is published about something called Free to Choose Medicine. I have been privileged to see the 3rd edition of the book that's coming out.
Fantastic.
And I have to say, they've improved on it greatly. It used to look more like Right to Try. But now the difference is that you can, as a patient, you can approach the drug company at any stage after they've done the safety testing and just the first bit of efficacy testing or effectiveness testing. But once you are in that free to choose medicine track, and once the company gives you that drug, if the company doesn't want to get FDA approval, they don't have to. They can actually sell the drug. And
wow.
Yeah.
That's a pretty interesting workaround you just exposed there.
Right. Now, the thing is, the problem, of course, is this hasn't passed yet, but there's a big push by the Heartland Institute, and it's heartland.org is their website.
Another good organization.
Yeah, another great organization. So they're pushing this, and, there's a lot of things coming together that make it politically more possible.
To do, right.
And one of the things is my book, Death by Regulation, where I actually say that we should do away with FDA approval. So I have a much more radical plan. So free to choose medicine starts to look conservative, It
does. It's funny, but the free market seems to be a very pleasant place to be in actuality. Everyone seems to make it out like it's sorted, but it seems to be everyone's trying to serve each other, and prices seem to be reasonable. It's funny how that works out.
Yes, and people have wanted this option. I have to tell you, I was in one of the first waves of scientists that were working on anti-AIDS drugs. And, of course, the AIDS patients can't wait 10 to 14 years.
No way.
No, not
no
back
way.
then. It was a death sentence.
Right, sure.
So what they did is they hired black market chemists to make the same drugs that we were working on. And by the time the FDA gave us permission to test our drugs in people, every AIDS patient in the country who wanted them had already had them and were resistant.
That's so classic.
We had to wait, for other people, new people, to be diagnosed with AIDS to test our drugs. Well, people shouldn't have to go to the black market to try to save their lives. And after that, cancer patients sued the FDA for the right to, take unapproved drugs, and the court said no. And now Right to Try is coming forward and basically is trying to do the same thing the cancer lawsuit did, cancer patient lawsuit. And then again, we're going to have a big initiative, Free to Choose Medicine, coming along. People want this option.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you are dying or your loved one is dying, you're terminal, right? There is no hope.
You're ready to grasp at straws. It's funny when you're calling it that, and it's just kind of an epiphany with me when they're saying, it's the black market. It's really more like where the market wants to be. I think it's a misnomer to label it the black market. It's where the people and everybody's trying to make things move to, is into that zone over there, away from the status quo.
Well, and do we want people to be making drugs in their kitchen? Because that's what
no way.
Patients are doing today.
Yeah. I mean, it shows, like you said, the need is there, but we don't want people doing that because they don't know what they're doing. You need regular organizations legitimately doing it, serving people, making money. That's it. It's really a shame.
The prices of drugs would be much lower.
Oh, infinitely.
If you go through all these regulations. Actually, one of the graphs in my book, Death by Regulation, shows that there's a direct correlation between what we pay at the pharmacy and what companies have to pay to get through the FDA regulations.
Yeah, well, of course, because they're not going to pay out of their own pocket. Everything's going to get passed along to the end user. I'll tell you, that was some...
It has to be, or they go bankrupt.
Well, of course.
Drugs.
Like any other business, but the motivation of the whole thing is so concocted. And we're going to have to drill down on this again at another time because I'm excited about this book. So we're going to reconvene in a future date, and I really appreciate you spending some time with me today.
Sure. It's been very good, and I hope your listeners can benefit from some of these tips I've shared with them. And, of course, again, I just want them to go ahead and consult with their healthcare practitioners, too, so that they get the best overall care. And if they want to learn more about the politics, I do have my website, ruwart.com, ruwart.com, And actually, they can read Healing Our World, the 1993 edition, in my free library there if they'd like.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I would definitely recommend that to everybody, and then they're going to want to read the updated version. Maybe they can work on their language. They can order a Spanish version and try that out for a change. So thanks again, and we'll talk later.